There's a moment most people never forget. You're standing in a room full of people you've known for years, co-workers, old friends, maybe even family, and something feels off. Not dramatically off, not in a way you can point to or explain, just slightly wrong, like a song playing a half step out of tune. Conversations seem rehearsed, smiles arrive a beat too late. Someone changes the subject, right when you start speaking. You go home and replay the whole thing in your head. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't start a fight, didn't say something offensive, didn't step on anyone's toes. And yet, the distance was real, the tension was real. That low-grade chill in the air was completely real. Here's what nobody tells you about that experience. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. What you picked up on is one of the oldest and most consistent patterns in human psychology. A pattern the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spent decades studying, writing about, and warning people about. And once you understand what's actually driving it, the confusion disappears. Not because things get easier necessarily, but because you finally stop blaming yourself for something that was never about you. So, let's talk about what's really going on. Let's talk about why awareness makes you dangerous, why growth makes you a target, and why the most psychologically honest version of you will always make certain people deeply, quietly uncomfortable. Let's look at the hidden architecture of human discomfort. Most of us grew up with a pretty simple model of why people don't get along. Someone says something mean, someone breaks a promise, someone cheats or lies or lets you down in some clear and obvious way. Conflict has a cause, and the cause is visible. But Carl Jung looked underneath that model and found something far more disturbing. Jung argued that the most powerful and most common form of social hostility has almost nothing to do with what you actually did. It has everything to do with what your presence makes other people feel about themselves. To understand why, you have to understand one of Jung's most foundational ideas: the shadow. Every person alive carries two versions of themselves. There's the version they show the world, put together, reasonable, generally decent. Jung called this the persona, which is literally Latin for mask. The persona is the face we curate for public life. It's how we want to be seen, the identity we've constructed and maintained and defended over years. And then there's everything else. The shadow is the part of you that didn't make the cut. It's the anger you buried, because expressing it seemed dangerous. It's the envy you couldn't admit, because admitting it felt shameful. It's the hunger for status, the secret pettiness, the fear of being ordinary, the quiet terror of looking in the mirror and not measuring up. The shadow isn't evil exactly, it's just the accumulation of everything a person has rejected about themselves, in order to maintain the persona they prefer. But here's the critical thing Jung understood. The shadow never goes away. You can ignore it, you can suppress it, you can pile layers of persona on top of it, and walk around for decades pretending it isn't there. But it stays. And when something, or someone, in the outside world pokes at it, when your presence, your behavior, or simply who you are, brushes up against what someone has been hiding from themselves, the psychological system reacts. It reacts defensively. It reacts in many cases with something that feels a lot like hatred. This is why awareness turns you into a threat. Here's the uncomfortable truth about becoming more perceptive. The more clearly you see people, their patterns, their motivations, the gap between what they say and what they actually mean, the more threatening your presence becomes to people who are still deeply identified with their mask. Not because you say anything, not because you call anyone out, but because your very presence introduces the possibility that you see what they're hiding, and that possibility alone is enough to trigger a defensive reaction. Think about it from their side. Imagine you've spent years carefully managing how people perceive you. You project confidence even when you feel hollow. You perform generosity while keeping score. You smile at the right moments and say the right things, and work very, very hard to make sure nobody looks too closely. And then someone walks into the room who just sees, who doesn't seem impressed by the performance, who isn't fooled by the social theatre. That person doesn't have to say a word. Their calm, their directness, their apparent indifference to the games everyone else is playing, all of it registers as a threat. Their presence alone is a kind of exposure. Jung called what happens next projection. Rather than confronting the discomfort internally, rather than asking, why does this person make me uneasy, and what does that say about me? The mind finds a simpler solution. It attributes the problem to the person who triggered the feeling. Suddenly, you're not someone who sees clearly. You're arrogant, you're judgmental, you're cold, or weird, or a lot. The accusation has nothing to do with you. It's the shadow, looking for somewhere to land. And once projection takes hold, something important shifts. People stop responding to who you actually are. They start reacting to what your presence stirs up inside them. You could be patient and kind and consistent every single day, and it won't matter. Because they're not looking at you anymore. They're looking at the mirror your presence holds up. Let's get specific. Let's look at the 7 ways you silently trigger people. Because this dynamic doesn't announce itself, it shows up in small, hard-to-name moments that accumulate over time. First, you reflect what they've avoided. Imagine you've been working on yourself. Maybe you've gotten serious about your health, your finances, your emotional reactions. You're not lecturing anyone, you're just living differently. And something subtle starts to shift in certain friendships. The jokes get a little sharper. The comments get a little more dismissive. You're obsessed. You're too serious. You've changed. What's happening is that your growth has become a mirror. Your discipline reflects their avoidance. Your consistency reflects their excuses. You didn't put that mirror there on purpose, but it's there. And some people simply cannot tolerate what they see in it. So, the discomfort shifts from themselves to you. Second, you represent what they gave up on. People rarely resent someone who's struggling more than they are. Resentment almost universally runs upward. It goes toward the person who represents something the resentful person knows, on some level, they could have done or become. The colleague who actually finishes what they start. The friend who walked away from a miserable relationship. The family member who finally went back to school. These people aren't attacking anyone, but their existence quietly indicts the choices everyone around them made. Devaluing you, writing you off as lucky or out of touch, is the easiest way to make their discomfort stop. Third, you've stopped needing their approval. This one is subtle and almost universally misunderstood. Most social relationships are held together partly by mutual dependency. One person needs validation, another needs to feel needed. The whole system stays in balance as long as everyone plays their role. But when you become psychologically independent, when you stop chasing approval, stop over-explaining yourself, stop calibrating your behavior to what other people think, the leverage disappears. From your perspective, this is growth. From their perspective, it feels like rejection. They can't easily explain this feeling, so the mind reframes it. You've become distant. You think you're better than everyone. What they're actually describing is the loss of control they had over you. But you became emotionally independent is a lot harder to admit than you became arrogant. Fourth, they can't predict you anymore. Social manipulation, and I mean the everyday, mostly unconscious kind, depends on predictable reactions. If I guilt you, you apologize. If I criticize you, you try harder to earn my approval. When you stop reacting the way people expect, the entire script breaks down. You don't bite on the bait. You don't perform the expected emotion. And for someone who has been running that playbook, your non-reaction is deeply unsettling, because it means you see the game. Fifth, you refuse to maintain the comfortable fiction. Every social group operates on unspoken agreements. We don't talk about certain things. We look the other way on specific dynamics that, if named out loud, would create chaos. When you stop participating, when you decline to laugh at the thing that isn't funny, when you name the dynamic everyone is pretending not to notice, you become a problem. Not because you attacked anyone, because you broke the agreement. Sixth, you started saying no. For a long time, maybe you were easy to lean on, easy to access, easy to take for granted. You absorbed things you shouldn't have. People experience this as comfort. The comfort of knowing you have soft enough boundaries that they can behave however they want without consequence. And then, something changes. You draw lines, you say no, and you mean it. What follows is rarely honest. People don't say, "I liked it better when I could walk all over you." They say you're cold now, or difficult, or selfish. They're just describing the end of a comfortable imbalance. Seventh, you're moving forward and the gap is showing. This might be the hardest one to navigate, because it touches people you genuinely love. When you change, really change, you create distance from people who are standing still. The people who haven't moved feel that gap, and the question the gap asks, silently, relentlessly, is, why not? Why am I still the same? That question is uncomfortable. So the mind turns the question into a judgment, and turns the judgment outward. Your growth becomes proof that you think you're special. Your changes become evidence of disloyalty. You didn't do any of this on purpose, but Jung would want you to understand this. Their reaction isn't really about you. It's about what your progress forces them to feel about their own stagnation. In every case, the resentment you're experiencing isn't a response to your behavior. It's a response to the psychological pressure your presence creates. You're not causing it by doing something wrong. You're causing it by doing something right. Jung believed that the deepest purpose of human development was individuation, becoming whole, integrating the shadow, dropping the persona that no longer serves you. Individuation is rare, it's uncomfortable, and when someone is genuinely doing it, it creates a specific kind of disturbance. Because individuating people are impossible to fully control. They don't stay in their assigned roles. They don't need your validation. Your becoming is a quiet indictment of everyone who decided not to. So what do you do when you recognize this pattern? Recognizing that someone's hostility is rooted in their own shadow doesn't make it disappear, but it changes what you do with it. The most common mistake people make is to try to fix it, to shrink back down, to sand off the edges that make people uncomfortable. But when you make yourself smaller to keep other people comfortable, the resentment doesn't go away. It just becomes more familiar. Because the problem was never your potential. The problem is what your potential reflects back at them, and that problem belongs to them. So what do you actually do? You let some relationships evolve naturally. Not every connection that made sense at one version of you will make sense at another. That's not failure, that's honesty. You stop interpreting every negative reaction as personal feedback. The cold shoulder from someone who never needed anything from you until you stopped being convenient. That's information. And perhaps most importantly, you do your own shadow work. Because the same patterns that operate in the people around you, the projection, the resentment, those patterns exist in you too. Nobody gets out of being human. Here's what tends to happen over time when you stay on this path. The social field around you shifts. Some people drift, a few disappear, and it hurts. But something else happens. The relationships that survive and the new ones that form feel different. They're built on actual recognition, one real person seeing another real person and deciding that's worth something. You also stop being quite so exhausted, because the exhaustion of maintaining performances, of managing how you're perceived by people who wouldn't like the real you anyway, is a relentless kind of drain. Carl Jung didn't write about shadow integration because it's a pleasant journey. He wrote about it because he believed it was the most important work a human being could do. Without it, you spend your whole life reacting to the world as if through a fogged window. The fogged window is the persona. The shadow is everything on the other side of it. And the work of individuation is learning to see clearly. clearly enough to know the difference between a relationship that's ending because you're moving forward and one that's ending because you've done something wrong. That distinction matters more than almost anything else. Because most of the things that look like rejection, the cold shoulder, the distance, the faint hostility you can't quite name, aren't really about you at all. You can't change that. You can't perform your way out of being a mirror. What you can do is stop flinching every time someone doesn't like what they see in it. Thanks for watching. Like,